This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the June 23rd edition of the DRF Players Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatale, not in the bunker in Brooklyn, but in the little room in Silver Lake, out here for the Santa Anita Gold Cup contest. We don't have the usual crew assembled. We have half of the usual crew, and that's at DRF Formulator himself, Mike Hogan. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Pete, but your math's a little off. The usual crew's 3. We got 2 of us. That's a little more than half, right?
Oh, there you go.
Or are you considering yourself half a person today?
I feel like half a person. That's a fair assessment. I was considering. I was like, I'm the host and they're the crew. I guess that was.
You're a part of the crew. Come on.
I like it. We are joined by. I know I'm not supposed to pick favorites, and we have so many regular guests that I really love, but this guy might be my favorite of all of them. His sardonic wit, his handicapping insights, just always a pleasure to welcome to the podcast, Marcus Hersh. Marcus, how are you doing today?
I'm flattered beyond words, Pete. Let's just sign off right there.
Marcus, I got a chance recently to hang out with you back in Brooklyn. We had a pleasing evening with quite a consortium of across the industry folks representing different standard bearers in horse racing. Amazingly, there were no fisticuffs thrown through the evening, but I was just curious to get your general impression of what's going on eating and drinking wise in Brooklyn, given the epicure that you are.
A lot. I counted 4,235 restaurants tapped in the 1-mile walk that we took.
That sounds like pretty accurate math. But were you impressed? Did it strike you as, obviously Brooklyn eating and drinking have received their share of hype, and I'm partially responsible for that over the last few years. Did the hype live up to any of your expectations?
Well, I didn't have any expectations because I'm a low-energy person, the kind of person that Donald Trump really wouldn't care for. But also, I have to admit, I have family in Brooklyn, and I've spent quite a bit of time there, so I have a little sense of the scene. But it's great. I mean, I think it's fabulous the way that not just there but everywhere there's been a transition to more locally and healthily sourced ingredients, and just people taking, and the public appreciating less cookie cutter sort of mechanical food production and really responding to very more particular and I think better and more sustainable, healthier food choices. I mean, there's certainly a capitalistic element to it, and there can be a certain level of preciousness too, but I think in general it's a great thing.
I think that's a great summation, actually. Very, very well done. But we're not here today to talk about sustainable food, and
we're here to talk about Brexit, right?
Oh, don't get me started on that. That's a whole different show.
Okay.
And I think it's quite possible. If I give my full thoughts on the matter, I'm just going to spend the entire weekend fighting on Twitter. So I'm just going to leave it alone, and.
Okay.
I will just say this for the record, if anyone's curious, I'm not happy. But we're here today to talk about horse racing, and we do a pretty good job usually on the pod of staying out of the sticky wickets and diving into what matters. A little bit later in the show, we'll have some excellent distraction in the form of our second and final winner for our Bad Beats contest, as well as an interview with our second honorable mention person. So that'll be fun. We'll get to that in a bit. But before we go there, I want to talk about the 4 PH races, the public handicapper races, for folks who are new to contests. And I know there's a lot of you out there. We've launched this new DRF Tournaments platform. I don't know, Marcus, if you had a chance to check it out at all.
I have seen it. It's excellent.
One of the things that struck me looking at the numbers is the number of new players who are participating because of the platform. Something like 30% of the participating players on the DRF Tournaments platform are new, and some of them are finding their way to us here at the podcast via Twitter. And I want those folks in particular to know that publichandicapper.com is a great place to continue your contest education. It's a little bit different of a deal in that it's a marathon, not a sprint. the contest going on now plays out from Oaks and Derby Day all the way through the Breeders' Cup. There are 4 races per weekend, and you just get to make one win bet in each one of them. It is very much of its own deal, but it's a great way to educate yourself. And the other thing that's really cool about it is it's not just the one main contest. You also have weekly and monthly prizes, so not too late to jump in on publichandicapper.com and get started. Every week, PH chooses the 4 races. As I mentioned, the first of those races this week comes from a place, Marcus, that I know you're very familiar with, Arlington Park. It's the Chicago Handicap. What did you think of this race, Marcus?
Well, when you mention contest speed, I mean, it's interesting to think of races from different perspectives. I mean, I have to do 1, 2, 3 picks to Arlington and several other tracks. But I mean, and some people, when they do this 1, 2, 3 selections, always pick the most likely winner because they want to have the winner on top. I mean, I try to figure out who I think is the most likely winner and then balance that with what I think the odds are going to be on all the horses and try to pick the horse with the best chance that will offer the best value. In contests, you go another step farther, and it depends on your strategy and what you think of the race, but obviously a lot of times you want to pick the longest price that you think has an actual chance to win the race. And this race, I think is a pretty good race in that way because I think there are a lot of horses that are going to be an appealing price that have a chance to win. I mean, and like from picking, I picked the shorter prices that are more obvious, but those are not necessarily horses that I would want to play in a contest or even bet on, to be honest. Like I picked Sarah Sis first. She's 7-2 on the line. She's got the leading jockey up. She could be 5-2, and she might be lone speed in this race. But on the other hand, and she's bounced back from terrible races before, but she just ran an abysmal race when she was last seen at Churchill. And, I mean, she doesn't have a huge inherent edge on other horses in this spot. So Sarah Sis is a horse that I would use, but I'm not going to be super focused on betting.
It's really a great question that you raised there, Marcus, when you have so many competing variables, and Sarah Sis is a great example of that. I mean, for many handicappers, every race starts with an analysis of the pace. And looking at this race, I agree with your assessment that Sarah Sis looks like she's going to be on the lead. But I've also noticed over time, it's hard to bet back these horses off, as you described, abysmal efforts. But is the fact that she was just a huge price that day and possibly against the profile of the way the track was playing, is that enough of an excuse that at least for your multi-race wagers you'd still feel okay using a horse like Sarah Sis in all 3 spots?
Well, she's run 3 really bad races in her life, and 2 of them have been at Churchill. And maybe, I mean, the other one was in the Kentucky Oaks where she was overmatched, and looked horrible training for the race. But maybe she just maybe she hates Churchill. I mean, it's funny because I think 15 years ago a horse like this would have been at least 1.5 times the price that she'll be this weekend. But as the pool of players has gotten smarter over time and there are less casual weekend fans, I think people are just naturally, that group of people is more willing to just throw out a really bad race like the one she just ran. And she's bounced back before. I mean, Ingrid Mason, her trainer, she's not having anywhere close to the type of meet or year she's had in the past, although she has been plagued with second and third. Part of the reason for that is the horses haven't been generally as sharp as they have in the last 2 Arlington seasons. I know there's going to be a huge amount of value in this horse, but I think that she was to me the most likely enough winner and at a decent enough price that I picked her first. But I think this horse Minx the Prize, who starts her Michael Dickinson. I think Sarah Sis will be the favorite. I think Minx the Prize will be second choice. She has an excellent synthetic surface record. She should like 7 furlongs. I think she's going to run a representative race. And third, I took Seeking Treasure, who comes out of a 2-turn turf race in Mountain Park that really did kind of fall apart. But that said, I thought she did run well, even though the race flow was generally in her favor. And I do think that she's shown enough versatility. She doesn't like dirt, but on synthetic and turf, I think she could make a nice run in a 7-furlong polytrack race. But again, if you focus in, oh, this horse Cat Ballou, who's cross-handed at Churchill, is running here. Like a horse like that could be competitive. Even a horse like the horse on the rail, Run Zippy Run. I mean, she comes off an open length win in flop, and she's probably better on turf. We have no idea about synthetics. She's 10-1 on the line. She'll probably be that kind of price. If that's a horse that you find something that you like about, I mean, I wouldn't hesitate to take a shot here.
All right, Mike, we don't talk about many synthetic races on the show. I mean, just a handful in the couple of years we've been doing the podcast. Before we get to your specific opinion in this race, Mike, how do you approach synthetic race handicapping in general? How is it different for you than turf or dirt?
Oh, boy, that's a good question. I mean, I think in sprints, it's a little more similar to dirt. Or, I mean, I guess in turf, a lot of times the fastest horse is often, the fastest speed is often very lethal in these turf sprints. At 7 furlongs, maybe a little less so, and it tends to be more of a specialist distance. I think it plays a little more fair. But I still think speed is dangerous, and I think when you've got a horse like Sarah Sis, who's proven on the synthetic, who's proven at Arlington, who's proven at the distance, and seems to have a not just a pace advantage, but a legitimate pace advantage over the rest of them, I think you have to start there and handicap the race based on what you think of her chances. And as Marcus said, I think she's probably the most likely winner. I'm even a little bit more forgiving of that last race. I think she was stuck down on the rail. I think inside was not really the place you wanted to be. I think Florent Giroux and maybe Ingrid Mason realized, look, we're facing Stone-tastic. We're not going to try and duel from out of the gate because we may not win that duel. And she just really never ran at all at a track that she may not prefer. So now she gets back to a place where she's had some success, 1 for 2, 2 for 2 in the exacta. She seems to be working well. That bullet on June 5th kind of jumps off the page, and she was about a second faster than the next fastest horse that day, which is Louis Vaporizer, who's a good sprinter, or Wally Ravelli, or was. Oh, is he retired?
He's in for a quarter on Sunday at Indiana. I mean,
really?
Saturday at Indiana, yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Anyway,
I hadn't been following.
No,
yeah.
He just was entered the other day, and he's got breathing problems. But I just to add to what you said about her good local record, like that, those were good races. She won her debut on the polytrack at Arlington in a romp, and then came right back in Arlington, Washington, Lassie, and ran second in one of the better recent editions, I thought, of that race. So I think she does like the surface. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think she's going to appreciate the class relief. She's not facing horses that are really, aside from maybe You Bought Her, she's not really facing many horses who are proven in graded stakes company. Even a horse like Cat Ballou, who you mentioned as one of the possible favorites, I think is 0 for 6 with only one time hitting the board in graded stakes. 0 for 7.
And totally unproven on all-weather surfaces as well.
Right. And even a horse like Minx a Prize for Michael Dickinson, first start for Dickinson, who since returning to training has had 11 runners, and his horses tend to get really heavily bet. 7 of the 11 were less than 4-1. 2 of them were odds on. You're right that Sarah Sis may be the favorite, but I think Minx Surprise is going to take money. And, for a horse that seems to have a pace edge and maybe the best horse in the race, I'd be okay with 5-2.
Let me ask you something before we move on, Marcus, just because of your knowledge of the way that Arlington plays. Generally speaking, how would you describe the track profile at Arlington at 7 furlongs, specifically in regards to how often you see wire-to-wire winners there?
Oh, I mean, I don't know about specifically at 7 furlongs, but I can tell you that in sprints and routes, almost the whole meet, the main track has played pretty fair. one really weird thing that I've noticed this year is that for years, the horses that pressed on the outside, especially, actually in sprints and routes, outside pressers just were at a horrible disadvantage, and that for some reason has not been the case this year. And like in turf races, where you get the horse that stays inside, makes a move off the turn, gets out, at the top of the stretch, that was the number one trip on polytrack for several seasons, and that has not conferred a necessary advantage. I haven't noticed this year either. There was a big period of huge inside speed edge for a couple of months last year in route races, and that hasn't happened this year. So for whatever reason, the things that I'm attuned to have not been playing out, which is one reason why I pretty much sucked at Arlington so far this year, although it showed signs of life recently.
Good, good. Rounding into form just in time to help the listeners of the DRF Players Podcast. Great info there, guys. Let's move on to Thistledown. Race 8 on Saturday is the Ohio Derby. $500,000 on the line, going 1.1 miles on the Derby for 3-year-olds. Mike, what were your thoughts on the Ohio Derby?
Boy, this will be an interesting one. One of probably the horse we've had the most discussion about on the Players Podcast over the last few months, with the possible exception of Donworth, has to be Mo Tom, and particularly those trips that he got in the Risen Star and the Louisiana Derby were the kind of trips that even if you don't actively follow horse racing, you heard about and you saw. So, and then of course
they were that bad, yeah.
They really were. I mean, so the question becomes, can he get a smooth trip here? And if so, is he the best horse in the race? And I'm not sure he can. I mean, he seems to find, even, he found trouble in the Kentucky Derby, which isn't terribly surprising because he was facing 19 other horses. Maybe he gets a clean trip here. If he does, he's probably the best horse in the race. But I'm not convinced he's the best horse in the race because there have been some horses that have seemingly been improving and running well, and I really like number 6, Wild About Deb, who's only made 3 starts, ran quite well in the Peter Pan. That though that effort wasn't flattered by Unified, I would say it was flattered by Governor Malibu, who ran well in the Belmont despite some trouble.
I agree with that. Yeah, absolutely.
So, I think Phil D'Amato picked this spot. This is, aside from Mo Tom, there's not a whole lot of monsters here, and he's the double blob horse, which is best last out buyer. So, basic handicapping, top buyer speed figure, last 2 starts. I'm going to get a fair price on him, partly because everybody's going to be on Mo Tom. Wild About Deb's the pick for me, but I wouldn't be surprised if Mo Tom beats him.
We had a long conversation about Mo Tom on a webinar we did yesterday. If folks want to check out the trip handicapping webinar we did with Jonathan Kinchin, you can find that on drf.com/YouTube. We got some nice feedback from our Twitter followers about that. And it's just always fun, pick Jonathan's brain, and Mike had some great stuff in there as well. So definitely worth checking out. But Mo Tom really is an interesting horse to talk about in terms of trip handicapping. And Marcus, I'll ask you, in my trip notes for this horse, I now have trips in his last 5 races. Is this a horse who's incredibly unlucky?
He's had a bad trip in every race he's run, I think.
Yeah, basically. Now, do we think at some point, with certain horses, at some point, when I have a trip note for every one, I just assume, maybe it's the kind of horse they are physically. They lend themselves to trouble. Other times, and Donworth is a good example, I contend that while Donworth certainly hasn't helped himself, by and large, I feel like he's been unlucky. When it comes to Mo Tom, is this a horse who's unlucky, or is this a horse who at this point we just have to say he has some characteristics that allow him to get in these bad spots all the time?
Well, I mean, the only characteristic that I could see a horse having that would allow, make it get into bad trips is being a deep closer, which is what he is. Other than that, I guess the other thing is a lack of handiness and not having acceleration to get in and out of spots. I don't think that's not Mo Tom. He is a plenty athletic and handy horse. And to be fair, in the Kentucky Jockey Club last year, The trouble that I saw him have was of his own making, where the theory is that he saw reflections on a sloppy track from the lights at night, because he had a really awkward lead change in an inopportune moment at mid-stretch. Otherwise, he had a good inside run in that trip. And to start with, Mike, I am in 100% agreement with your general perspective on the race. I think it's a two-horse race for win here between the two horses you mentioned. I do diverge from you slightly, and I think that Wild About Deb is going to take a lot of action and might even challenge Motom for favoritism. I would have thought that he might even be favored if Castellano hadn't gotten him out at Motom, but I think that cements him as a favorite because, we love our jockeys. Everyone all the time will cast Land as our professional jockeyologists, I would say at this point. And Motom is I really like Motom. I think that the biggest complaint I hear about Motom is he has not run fast yet. And to me, I just don't understand how you can say that when you obviously can see that he hasn't had a chance to run to his best in any of his recent races. I mean, how can you say he's not fast when he hasn't gotten to run? I mean, his Louisiana Derby and his Risen Star, he was going to run many lengths better than he actually did. I think the general consensus is in Louisiana Derby he wouldn't have caught Governor, but I think that he had a chance to win that race if he hadn't gotten stopped. It's a horse I got to see, several times over the winter, got to watch train, and I think there's still a lot there. His Derby trip was not great, and he ran creditably, and the Derby, Tom Amis pointed this out, and it's true. I mean, you think, Kentucky Derby, obviously it's going to be a key race, those are the best horses, but that's not always true at all. A lot of times the horses come out of the Derby, and a lot of them run like bums for a while or permanently. I mean, we've seen Derbies that haven't produced anything. Right now, all signs are pointing to this Derby being a very live race. I mean, everyone that's run back has run well. And I think Motom is going to carry that on. I don't think there's a ton of speed here, but I do think with the Fletcher horse drawn on the far outside, whose name is completely escaping me at the moment.
Decorated Soldier, is that right?
Soldier, yeah, Decorated Soldier, and the Ohio-bred Moto, stretch-out sprinter. I think there's going to be enough pace to spread the field for Motown to find room. I mean, is he a really appealing play at his price? No, but again, I'm looking at it as a two-horse race for win between Wild About Deb, who I think is still potentially progressive, and Motom. I mean, I'm not buying Adventus. He's blinkers off, but I just have seen enough of him to feel like he's just not progressive right now in my mind. He's had his chances. He had a couple trips, but I haven't seen anything there that makes me think he's got some explosive forward move in him. Maybe over time he'll improve. And then, where do you get after that? Cocked and Loaded probably didn't like off turf last time, but he was terrible in the Pat Day Mile. And he looks to me like a 2-year-old who's not improving. The locals I don't think are good enough. The Fletcher horse, he might be forwardly placed. I could see him getting into the trifecta, maybe over Adventus if he improves in this race. But it's not an especially appealing race from a wagering perspective, from my point of view.
I want to just talk about Adventus for another minute, because I haven't had a chance to see him in the flesh, but just looking at him on TV before the Peter Pan and before the Wood Memorial, he looked to me like the kind of horse that might be more of a late developer physically, like a horse that was coming around. You obviously see it the opposite way, Marcus. I just wanted a little bit more on if you had anything specific. Buyer speed figure-wise, I feel like he's showing some signs of improvement. As you point out, the trips haven't been the greatest. Do you think I'm wrong to think that he's one who could be coming into hand, though?
No, but I'm not disagreeing with that. But right now, we're looking at a horse who's on, he's had a 5-race development pattern going steadily through December, okay? And so I just don't think that, for me, he doesn't have a lot of that potential on this day. I'm not saying that in 5-6 months, or even as a 4-year-old, he couldn't end up being a solid horse. And he did have front bandages on last time too, for whatever that's worth. He gets blinkers off. First of all, the line in this race is not good. This horse is not going to be 3-1 to Motom's 5-2. Wild About Deb and Motom are the top 2 choices. You're going to get a better price than 3-1 on Adventus. So that's the good news. And if and that perspective that you have, Pete, is not, I mean, I'm not saying that it's outlandish. And if you are getting the price you like, it's something that you could consider.
All right. Well, I think we gave some people some stuff to chew on there, and that every year it's sort of an interesting race for 3-year-olds, the Ohio Derby.
It's getting better again. It had some down years, but it's better again now.
Before we move on from Motom, I want to ask Marcus in particular one thing. That you mentioned the jock switch to Javier Castellano. Is part of the issues Motom has had in the past, is it partly the style of Lannery, who tends to be, you talk about Calvin Burrell as riding the rail. Lannery may be even more extreme than that, and some of the troubles that Motom, at least from my viewing, had was when he got against the rail and got into traffic. Is the jockey switch not just to the Eclipse award-winning jockey? Maybe with Castellano, is that hinting at perhaps a different style here, or what's your take on that?
Well, the horse is going to come from behind, but maybe he doesn't need to completely fall off the back door. Really, I mean, the only ride Lannery was at fault in the Louisiana Derby. That was totally his doing. He made a terrible decision to go inside again in mid-stretch when he already had been inside and saved all the ground on the turn. There's no ground save when you're going on a straightaway, and he went back to the rail and ran right into trouble. Corey Lannery is a jockey who has worked really hard and has done a great job. Has been very reliable, and I love that he saves ground all the time. But I think Javier Castellano he's a notch better rider probably generally. I don't think that's unfair to say. Are there specific things that he's going to do that are going to change the horse? I don't know, maybe. But the thing that I could see about it is just a change of pace. Somebody different doing slightly different things, and maybe being positioned a little bit closer.
Mike, I have a research assignment that we should do with the DRF internal system. We don't have to do it on the spot here, but sure. I'm going to take a wild guess that Corey Lannery, the record riding in Kentucky, is going to be way better than the record riding other places. And I don't mean that to impugn his ability so much as I just think he rides, especially Churchill, which is a track that has been known to get the occasional bias, whether it's a rail or speed or anti-rail or anti-speed, and to know where to be at Churchill. I feel like he's really good at that from my observations. I realize we have the data with the DRF internal system to take a look at how he does at in Kentucky and specifically at Churchill versus other places. Might be worth doing, and maybe a worthy tweet to send out at some point.
Well, you know what his record was at Saratoga last summer?
I do.
What was it?
57.057.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's ugly. That's ugly.
And 80. So much of this is the horses you get. He's got his business is in Kentucky. He's got a great clientele base. If you get on live horses and you're a confident rider, you're going to win. The difference between the number 10 and the number 1 at a given jockey colony with the right live horse is just a tiny, tiny increment, in my opinion. And there are not these huge, huge gaps between. That's what I was trying to say about Castellano. Castellano's an Eclipse Award winner. Corey Lannery has been leading rider at Churchill a number of times. Castellano is widely perceived as this vastly superior jockey. I don't really think that there's a huge gulf between the two. A great deal of it is who gets the live mounts in the nationally prominent races and develops a reputation in this area.
I don't disagree with that. Mike, you had something to add?
Yeah, I just did a quick and dirty look. Lifetime at Churchill, Corey Lannery is 16% win, 46% in the money, $1.95 ROI. Lifetime just overall, so this isn't at other tracks, this includes his Churchill, he's 14% win, 41% in the money, 156 ROI. So clearly better at Churchill, kind of supports exactly what you were saying.
For me, one of the biggest things about jockey handicapping is, it gets into something we talked about a little bit on the last podcast actually, which is the idea of race design. When you're envisioning how a race is going to be run in your head ahead of time, knowing certain riders' tendencies and where that's going to put their mount in the race. I do think it's an important consideration to think about who's riding. But I think Marcus's point is the bigger one, which is that on the live mounts, that difference between 1 and 10, really not that much. Mike, anything to add about how you look at jockeys in your handicapping?
I look at it, and we can talk about it a little bit in the Gold Cup. I look at it more from a trainer decision as to why the trainer is making a change or why the trainer is choosing a jockey he's either had success or not had so much success with. That's more the way I do it. And I also look at it in terms of how the market is going to assess a jockey as well. And I think, with one like Castellano, they tend to overbet based on name. So he's just going to drive Motom's price down even further.
That's a terrific point about the way that the market works. I think that the public, and Marcus hinted at before talking about in the jockeyologists in simulcast land, if anything, the public understands who the good riders are, who the ones who might be difference makers are too well in a way that's going to depress the price and take away any advantage. So you've got to be, if you want your jockey handicapping to work for you, you've got to be working it, I think, in the more subtle ways. Let's move on to Santa Anita. We've got a pair of Grade 1 races on Saturday that we're going to be talking about now. It all starts with the Triple Bend, doesn't it? I didn't put it in front of me, but yeah, the Triple Bend is the 8th race. Marcus, who did you come up with to be the winner for the Triple Bend?
My top pick is Ambitious Brew.
Ambitious pick.
Yeah, I'm looking for something beyond the two favorites in this race. Kobe's back, and he's the Motom of sprinters, really. Blinkers have helped. He had blinkers on 3 races ago, and that did help initially. And I think he ran a pretty good race at Churchill, though Calculator was absolutely awful in the Met Mile, and Catalina Red freaked that day. So Kobe's back. He's the most likely winner. He's the most proven horse. He's a millionaire. 7 furlongs is his trip. But I just, looking back at his races this year with blinkers, they were better. But then Saludos Amigos, he beat just fine, and then he beat this horse Coastline, who's back again here in San Carlos. I just, if he gets into a little bit of trouble or doesn't quite fire his best race, his price is going to be low enough that you're going to feel bad about deciding he was such a standout, because I think he is going to be the decided favorite. And with Subtle Indian, I think the main concern that a lot of people are going to have is with the 7 furlongs. I think he could be a fine 7 furlong horse. And here's a jockey change right here to Mike Smith from Vasquez. And Vasquez gave this horse a really, really bad ride last time. I don't know the guy. I'm sorry to be blunt, but it was awful. He opened up for no reason. He got in a speed duel with himself, and then he drifted off the rail and let the winner come up the fence. And his horse wasn't, it says drifted out, but it was just carelessness on the jockey's part, if you ask me, having watched the race. But the problem with Subtle Indian is, first of all, he's an Oaklawn specialist to some extent. All his best races have been there. And sprinters, in my opinion, need time. They run good sprinters run super fast and it's hard on their bodies. This horse has been a once-a-month horse since January. He could easily, he might be low in speed here, but he could also be totally over the top. Okay, so that's how I'm getting past those two. Lord Nelson is back in 22 days after running the highest number he's ever run in his life. That's a pretty fast turnaround, if you ask me, for a horse who's been off for several months beforehand. And also, I know he got a good number from the race. He ran extremely fast. The track was very fast that day. And I'm not, I think he's definitely taking a step up against these horses from what he just beat last time. And if you go back and look at his 3-year-old form, he had a bit of a reputation, but I think he might have been a bit overrated in name. I've never saw any really tremendous performance from this horse. He could end up in a good spot, sitting right behind the speed. But I don't really want him at price that short. So I started digging around the other ones, and the one that caught my eye was Ambitious Brew. His dirt races have been 2 turns, but he shows in his turf sprints that he can keep up going short. And his action on dirt, if you watch his Longacre, his Los Al race from September 2015. He went really nicely that day. I think he's fine on dirt, and he was pretty impressive in that Talbred long layoff comeback race. You can imagine him moving forward from that, and he shows a really fast drill on May 22nd. I think he'll be every bit of 8-1, and I'm hoping to get a little run for my money from Ambitious Brew here.
I think it's an interesting case you make there. Kobe's back caught my eye, if only because this is a horse who's so good that he's a closer that Jonathan Kinchin routinely bets, and there aren't too many of those. So I always give extra credence anytime I see Kobe's back's name in the PPs. Mike, where did you end up here?
Well, it's Kobe's back for me, unfortunately. I think he's just the best horse in the race. I think he's going to be a favorite. Hopefully it's not a prohibitive favorite. You've got Subtle Indian, who I hope will take some money, and I just don't know if he's good enough, and I don't know if he wants to go, Marcus, you thought he'd be okay 7 furlongs, and maybe he is, but I'm not sure he's okay 7 furlongs against this type. I mean, he was beating at Oaklawn Alsvid and Den's Legacy and Bayard and WB Smudge. I mean, these aren't horses of the quality that he's going to be facing tomorrow. And even in the Kona Gold, when he had that loose lead, sure, maybe the jockey let him go a little bit too early, but he looked gone, and he just tired late, and the only reason why he held on is there wasn't really a legitimate closer in the race, with the possible exception of Wild Dude. Everyone was staggering home that race. If Kobe's back was in that one, he wins by 6 lengths. He's one of the few horses that we see that actually seems to quicken on the dirt. I mean, his last race, even though he didn't win, was sub 12 last furlong. He's regularly throws down 11-3 in the BC Sprint. He was 11 flat in the last furlong. I mean, this is a horse that has some strong late kick. I think he's going to be flying late.
Certainly seems like Subtle Indian could set it up for him. I guess with Subtle Indian, my fear about him with the distance is just his ability to distribute his energy evenly. But the Smith jockey booking certainly is really interesting there, since we've been sort of spending a lot of time today talking about the effect that jockeys can have. Marcus, it sounds to me like you do think that one of the things Smith could do to this horse is just ration that energy a little better. How important is the Smith booking to your thinking Subtle Indian might get the 7 furlongs?
Well, I mean, I do think that's the idea. I don't think any horseman wants to see their horse, open up by 5 lengths going 21-2. I mean, that's not a good distribution of energy at all. Sometimes with a front runner, you end up having to do that because you're being pushed. To do it for no reason seems a little imprudent. And just the way the guy rode the race, it didn't look like a person riding in a graded stakes. The way he sat on the horse and was looking around, and the way he handled coming off the turn. And to be honest, I was impressed with the way he ran, because they attacked him on the turn, and it looked like he was going to get buried. And he kicked clear again and beat everybody except the horse who got the drain trip up the rail, and who was supposed to win with the way the race set up. And I think his win against Alsvid was pretty. I mean, Alsvid is a pretty good 6 furlong horse, dusted him at Oaklawn. And I do, with his pedigree, and sometimes it's easier for front runners who can stick around a little to go 7 furlongs, because they don't have to go quite as all out for the first 4/3 of a mile. And like I said, I think he could be a decent 7 furlong horse. But again, my concern with him is that he's back again. They've been going to the well a lot with this horse, who had some issues early in his career. I mean, if you look, he had a period of time when he could barely even run. And I just don't like him to run back to his recent form at all. Jockey change for the positive, which I think is the case or not.
All right, let's move on to the Gold Cup. We've seen this a few times this year in California, where we have these Grade 1 races that don't necessarily look a whole lot like Grade 1 races. Mike, we'll start with
the Triple Bend in particular.
Yeah. But how does
Exactly.
I'll ask both of you, starting with Mike, does that change the way you approach your handicapping? I mean, for me, the typical Grade 1 I look at a little bit differently. I think I'm looking at these races a little more just like races. Does that sound right to you, Mike?
It does sound right to me. I mean, because you don't have I'm trying to think of an example. You don't have the California Chromes or the Beholders or at his best, the Game On Dudes in this race. You don't have these horses that you can count on to fire big shots in Grade 1 races every time. You've got horses that either are proven against lesser, stepping up and trying, or ones like, say, Melatonin, who stepped up and won a heat with a huge effort in a Grade 1, but that was the first time that he'd ever really run anything like that. So I'm kind of with you, Pete. I look at these as maybe lesser graded stakes. Maybe some of these will turn into legitimate Grade 1 horses, but I'll be surprised if any of these are going to be players in, say, the Breeders' Cup Classic.
Where did you end up in this race, Mike?
Well, it's an interesting race, and we talked a little bit about jockey assignments, and I think the domino that kind of led to the jockey assignments falling is number 1, Bala Bali. Very interesting to see him show up here for the first time on dirt, 21 races, all on the turf. But he hasn't won in his last 5 starts, and he's been favored in many of them, so I think they're just trying something different. He's seemingly working really, really well on the dirt, and Mandela doesn't put a horse in a race that has no shot. So he's a little interesting to me, and I think the thing that really caught my eye was Flavian Pratt decides to ride and had been riding on Opportunity, including the trip to Dubai, where he ran well and finished 3rd against California Chrome. Yet he chooses to go with Bala Bali. So that was notable to me. That opens up the mount for Mike Smith on Opportunity, which then opens up the mount for Rafael Bejarano on Imperative, who I think is another one that's a little intriguing. I like Bejarano on him. And I, even though he's 0 for 12 at Santa Anita, he's going to provide a little bit more value than he has in his previous starts. So I think the shorter priced ones are vulnerable. I might take a shot with either Imperative or Bala Bali, depending on the price.
That's an interesting point about the jockey booking. Sometimes there's stories that happen there that, it's not a question of one jockey choosing another. Something else happened behind the scenes. It looks to me like that might be the case with this situation, but I'm not sure. I haven't really heard the inside word. We'll have to take a look in the pages of Daily Racing Form and articles on DRF.com. Look to maybe get a little bit more insight into that from our fantastic team out there in California. Marcus, what are your thoughts on the Gold Cup?
Well, people keep talking about Opportunity as a solid favorite. I don't like him at all in this race. If you look at our excellent California team's coverage, you'll find Bob Baffert saying that he was uncertain that he was even going to run in this spot because he wasn't training that well, and that, I'm hoping his class will carry him through. It's hugely negative stuff coming out of this camp. A. B, I think he's better at 1 1/8 than a 1 1/4. C, he's currently overrated because of that 3rd in the Dubai World Cup, which for him was a good race, but he's maxed out there, and I don't like him to win this race at all. He'll now win by 17 lengths. I like Melatonin a lot to win this race. I'm a believer in him. It's just the opposite with this horse as from Opportunity, in that he's been pointed to it for a long time. He wasn't at his very best for the Californian, and rather than run in there and knock them out, even if he ran a big race, David Hoffman chose to wait, and the horse has an excellent work pattern. To me, the Oakland Handicap showed that the Santa Anita Handicap, which was a tremendous performance, I thought, was not a fluke. I know FNX came back and ran just terrible at Churchill, but that's the whole point. He didn't run close to his best. We know that FNX on his best he would be the favorite in this race. Again, if he had won, if he ran like he did in the Breeders' Cup and at Oakland, he would be no worse than second choice, probably the favorite. And the fact that Melatonin shipped for the first time and had a right to bounce, 5 weeks back after clearly the race of his life, the fact that he still ran I thought a fine second in Oakland Handicap was the validation that I wanted to see off of his performance in the Santa Anita Handicap. I don't know why he is this horse. He's by Kodiak Cowboy, who was a sprinter out of a Yankee Victor mare. He was sprinting his whole life because he's bred to be a sprinter, but he stayed 1.25 miles great in the Santa Anita Handicap, and I just don't see how he doesn't get a fabulous trip. I mean, Lieutenant Colonel seems to me to be going to the front here, but I don't see anybody else who is. And Melatonin's drawn outside him. To me, he gets the perfect pressing trip, and I think he stays. And if he's 7-2, I think he's a great price.
I agree with you about Melatonin. I think you also indicated there what probably happened with Pratt and that booking. Balabali, ready to commit to the race before opportunity was, gave them the call. It's not like he could have, it'd been very difficult to get back on if he wanted to. And perhaps those negative vibes that you were describing, Marcus, indicated that he wouldn't have wanted to. So that,
I think that's what happened too. I mean, I should mention another horse too. Hard Aces, I think, is set up to run a good race. I mean, he won this race, and a lot of these horses are going to find the extra furlong going 1.25 miles challenging, and that's what Hard Aces need. To be competitive at this level is 1.25 miles. He's too much of a grinder. He doesn't have enough pace to win at even a weak grade 1 at 9 furlongs, I don't think. But he seems to me to be coming into this race in similar form to last year, and I mean, I think he's going to have a good chance to get into the trifecta, the square number.
Mike Hogan actually in this race last year picked him right on top and ended up being right. I subsequently gave him a very hard time simply because I felt like even in his big race where he won, Hard Aces was probably the third best horse in the race. But Mike, let me ask you, what do you think the chances are of a Hard Aces repeat, given that you're, in his fan club in a sense?
I liked him in that race, and even though I would agree with you that he wasn't maybe best that day, it still didn't matter if you had a win bet on him. You still got a nice return. So, but I mean, he's the kind of horse that look, he'll run. He's kind of like Marcus said, he's kind of a grinder. He'll be running. He'll probably round out the tries or the supers. I just don't know if he's that good to win. He's going to need everything to break his way in order to win, and since that race, he hasn't really, not only has he not won, he hasn't really run a winning race because he hasn't really been within 4 lengths of winning it at any point in the stretch. So, I don't know. He'll be a square price if you like him. I won't talk anybody off of him, but he's not really for me.
Yeah, I think that the bottom-up tri-key, though, that Marcus seemed to be hinting at, that's not crazy, especially if you like Melatonin for those top 2 spots. You can see how you might be able to draw up a clever exotics ticket there. Marcus, thanks so much for joining us today. We're going to let you go before we move on to the last segment of the show today, but always a pleasure, and I hope you come back soon.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
Excellent. All right, we are going to now head to the bad beat portion of the show. Take it away, Mike.
All right, last show we had a couple stories from our bad beat contest. We had one of the 2 winners, Pete in the previous one said we couldn't decide, so we split it. That's a little bit negative. I think instead we had a dead heat. We had 2 winners that could not be separated at the wire. So we're going to have the other winner on to talk his story, and then we're going to have another honorable mention winner just because we had so many great stories here. We wanted to be able to serve some of them up for the listening audience. So we welcome to the podcast Nick McMurty, who wins $50 in DRF tournament site credit as well as a signed copy of Harvey Pack's book. Welcome, Nick.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me. Hi, Pete.
So Nick, tell us a little bit about your bad beat. Your bad beat was a story that I think resonated with Pete and me and Jonathan, just because it's one of these things that I think all of us want to try and hit the pick 6. The camaraderie, your dad, the family, putting together a pick 6 ticket and being alive to a big payout. Those are the kinds of things that we can all dream of, and I think many of us have sat in similar positions to you. So why don't you, if you don't mind, relive some of the agony that was your bad beat?
Sure. My father and I have been going to Saratoga for years, decades, and we always try to make an annual trip out of it. And last summer, we were there with our really close family friend, John, and things were going good. we were hitting our races, and we decided to pool and each pick a horse in the pick six. And we hit the first leg, second leg, third leg, and all of a sudden, we hit the first 5 legs, and we were alive in the pick six. We've been playing horse, like I said, for a long time, and we've never actually been in this position before. One is we don't really play a lot of pick sixes, but also we haven't been as lucky as we were that day. And as we went to the final leg, the final race, everyone was very excited. We had 3 runners in the race, and there was 8 horses in the race. We all went down to the paddock at Saratoga, at the paddock bar, got a drink, and we were, like I said, we were all very excited, and actually we were very confident too. For whatever reason, we just felt like that was our day. And as the horses made their parade in front of us, we all went down to the fence and started smiling, happy, jubilant, talking. It was a great day. Weather was awesome. And then as the horses started approaching the gate, we got the first call. You know, we have a late scratch in this race. And okay, sure enough, it was one of our runners. Okay, no big deal. I remember talking to Dad. Okay, Dad, hey, no big deal. We pick up the post-time favorite, who we didn't take. We didn't necessarily.
So now you're covered. You're still covered to 3 horses, but now there's only 7 in the field. Correct.
And in my email with you guys, I try to make a little silver lining here in the news, in that mathematically our odds actually improved. We went from 3 of 8 runners to 3 of 7 runners. So hey, at that point you're like, okay, who is this runner? Who's the favorite? You look at him, and he didn't necessarily jump out to us, but hey, he was ours now. And then, sure enough, as they're going up to the gate, I think it was a maiden race. I'm pretty certain it was last race of the day. Horse got fractures or whatnot, and sure enough, another late scratch. And we look down, oh, it's our horse. Now we have 2X on the pre-horse favorite, pre-race favorite that we didn't like to start with. So we have 2 on the 2X on the favorite and our last runner. So at this point, we're kind of like, this isn't necessarily boding well for us. And while we were 3 of 8 to start, went to 3 of 7, now we're down to 2 of 6. And sure enough, race unfolds, and you can kind of envision how this was. Our happy, jubilant faces were kind of like, oh, this isn't going to go well. And that favorite quickly faded on the far turn. I remember that. And as it came from the stretch, our original runner was still alive, and he was looking okay. And as it came down, we knew we didn't get there. And the horse he turned out to lose to, I distinctly remember this. And we're looking back at the form and stuff. It was a horse named Smiling John. And, we lived all over the U.S. growing up and whatnot. And my dad had maintained one really close family friend, and his name was John, and he was there with the race with us that day. And I'm like, of all the horses we lose to, a horse named John. So it was kind of a bitter beat, but it's a memory. It's a memory I have of my father and our good friend, and one we won't forget. I wish it turned out differently. That everyone wants to have a pick 6 ticket cash, but it wasn't our day. So.
Well, hopefully you'll have another chance maybe this summer, and who knows, maybe you'll use this $50 in site credit to play a feeder and qualify for the NHC or the BC qualify and BC, and you'll end up turning the bad beat into one of those stories that you can tell for years to come. So let's hope.
Yeah, I hope so, Mike. I thought about this, and Pete sent me the email, and I'm like, wow, it's very gracious of you guys to do this and whatnot. And I thought about, the site credit that you guys give me. And we already actually have this year's annual trip planned out. It's going to be the weekend of August 19th. So I'm thinking maybe with the credit that day of the feeder, I'll ask Dad and John to help me pick out some horses for us, and maybe we'll turn our luck into that this year.
I love it. I think it's a great attitude. I was just looking up the race. I was remembering it. It's kind of funny. One of the horses who I'm pretty sure you would have had who scratched turned out to be marking decent horse for Kieran McLaughlin,
right.
who's had his fair share of adventures since. Bokeelia Island was the McGahee horse who was second. I don't know if that's one you used or not, but a horse who I subsequently managed to lose a lot of money on. But it's always those maiden races at Saratoga. There's always a lot of interesting things going on in there. And we want to thank you very much, Nick, for coming on the show. And please do keep us posted on the via Twitter or email on how you do with the site credit you get. Do you have any idea which contest you think you might want to try to play in with that site credit you're going to receive for DRF tournaments?
I've actually been trying for an NHCC.
Oh, great.
So hopefully I'll maybe that day one will pop up or around that weekend, and we'll go from there. But yeah, I'd love to qualify. I was close a couple weeks ago, and hopefully maybe that day we'll turn around. I'll get a seat and meet you guys there.
That sounds fantastic. Thanks for coming on the show.
Okay, thanks, Pete. Thanks, Mike.
Now we're going to bring in James Timinck, who I've had the pleasure of meeting a couple of times at the NHC. James, how are you doing today?
How you doing, Pete?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Always a pleasure to get to talk to horse players, and I know you're a real horse player. You were telling me a little bit about your story and your career choices and how you ended up as a horse player. But the thing I liked about your Bad Beat story made it so different and won you the honorable mention in this contest. It didn't even have to do with horse racing. Will you give folks a retelling, as it were, of your Bad Beat story?
Absolutely, Pete. But before that, I just wanted to say the last time I actually saw you and spoke with you in person was at that elevator at the NHC. And if you remember, there was the end of day 2. We were at the elevator with a model and a Armani suit. I believe his name was Matt Bernier. And it was a fine Armani suit. He was looking to the nines, and there was down to 50 people, and so those top 50 were sleeping to go into day 3 on Saturday. And I said to you that my pick to win it all was one Paul Matisse.
I do remember that. An impressive prediction. Did you get down in the sports book on Paul before the tournament started, or was it more a case of as things were unfolding, you just thought things were breaking Paul's way?
If I had the hindsight to go down there and wager, I would have. I did not get down there in time. They had closed it fairly early before the tournament had started, and yeah, to slap down $5, $10, $20 on Paul would have been a pleasure.
You know, he bet himself, right? He walked away with another 10 from that. Pretty impressive performance at the NHC. Hopefully, we're going to see you back there this year. Have you qualified yet?
I have not. I believe that the fall is where I would, like to focus more of my attention to. I love when things start to heat up at the end of Saratoga and going into Keeneland, and I will definitely put a full court press on as the seasons change.
All right. So judging from your accent and the way that I know you like to spend your free time, I'm going to guess that back in the day you were no stranger to a place called Wonderland. Is that a decent guess?
It is a decent guess. I have frequented that establishment, but I am more closer to the southeastern Massachusetts area, born and raised in Brockton, Massachusetts. And there was a track and betting hub called Rainham Taunton Greyhound Park, where saw me every single day.
Well, tell us this memorable story from a night there at Rainham.
Okay. Well, like you said, my bad beat was not in horses; it was in greyhounds, and every greyhound race is 8 dogs going to post, and that night, me and a few friends, we chased the big pools, and on that given day, because they ran 7 days a week, the name of the pool is a tri-super pool, and what a tri-super pool is you have to hit the trifecta in the first leg, and then 2 races later, you get, if you hit the tri, you get an exchange to play the superfecta, which you have to hit all 4, obviously. And so on that day, there was a carryover. It started to get up there about, I don't know, 50, 60, 75,000. People started, put a lot more money into it. So it became, a play that, that caught our interest. We managed to get a $24 trifecta in the first leg. So we had 24 exchanges to the back half, which is the superfecta leg. And so what had happened was we were able to play one greyhound on top and keep 4 greyhounds behind him. So we would have 5 dogs. One had to win, and then any combination of the other 4 would have to run second, third, and fourth. And we would take down the pool. So greyhound races usually take about, anywhere from 30 to 32 seconds, sometimes 29 seconds. So it's a very fast result when you get down to it, and a lot of things happen very fast. So what had happened here when they opened up the gates was it's a mad rush to the first turn. Our greyhound seized to the lead, as we knew he would, and then there was major traffic on the first turn where a horse blew wide from an inside post. And when I say blew wide, he was on the rail. He took a right-hand turn on that sharp first turn, and he ended up taking out almost the entire field. And so what ended up happening, our dog managed, our lead dog that we needed to win was able to elude the traffic and seize a huge lead. And after the traffic on the first turn, 3 dogs went down, and it became a 5-dog race. And so as those other dogs gathered themselves, the 3 dogs went down and were out of the race. As the other 4 dogs gathered themselves, on our ticket, the dogs ended up spreading out, and the best way I can explain it is the lead that Secretariat had in the Belmont was how the dogs were spread out in the rest of the running of the race. Our dog that we needed to win was up by 15, and then all the other dogs in the race had spreads of about 10 lengths as they were running around the oval. So we managed to get our winner in, and so then we got our second place finisher and then our third place finisher. So there was only 2 dogs left in the race as they hit the final turn, and we had a 10-length lead, and we were celebrating already. Everybody in our corner was going crazy.
Cardinal sin right there.
Absolutely. It was like a scene out of probably the Cleveland Cavaliers locker room when they won the championship this week. But anyway, so we get to that final dog, and everybody's eyes are glued to the TV, and then all of a sudden the greyhound pulled up, and the best way to say, he pulled a muscle in the back, in one of his back legs. He started to limp. He was still running, but he started to limp, and he only had about another, I'd say, 10 yards to go. But the other dog was going full stride at about, 25 miles per hour, and my dog was running about as fast as I can run, which isn't fast for human. And he passed us right at the wire, and we lost the whole pool.
Do you know what you think you would have swept the pool, and what do you think was in it?
Well, it was not hit the way it was run, and so yeah, I'm thinking it's a pretty safe bet. I did not get that information, but I would have to say the worst case scenario. It was just on a lazy Tuesday or Wednesday because they raced 7 days a week. So I'm thinking, it was most definitely the whole pool. Worst case scenario about 37,000.
Oh my Lord! Now you guys used to go around back in the bad old days before easy simulcasting. You were one of the crews, and there were a bunch of people who did this, who'd travel around the country chasing jackpots. Is that right?
Yeah, but what ended up happening was we didn't really have to chase the country because we had a guy in Tennessee, we had a couple guys in Florida, Mile High Greyhound Park was still running in Denver, and so it was almost like a regional thing where with the ability of simulcast, we could just play our tickets in the comfort of our own state, and then just call up and start mixing and matching, and everybody would put their tickets at their location. So
now, how about, oh, you go ahead.
So it was so very easy. And so, you would just you would have a race or two interval before the second half of the Bonanza bet. And so you would have time to correspond with people, map out your plays, and each person would put in the certain combinations that we needed to get the most coverage.
Now, these days, is chasing gimmicks still an important part of your game? Were you playing, the Mohawk super high five carryover the other night and stuff like that?
No, the gimmicks, no. It pretty much states now that, made the transition to thoroughbreds, going after the rolling exotics, the pick 4, pick 5, pick 6s. I mean, maybe there will be a wager that, excites me or is made in the future, but those ones, picking, a super factor +1 and stuff, is not, is not on my radar right now.
Let me see if you mind telling the story you told me at the NHC about your career path. You were on course to be a postman, if I'm not mistaken.
I actually was for 10 years, and while I was doing that, I was still handicapping, and people, they tell you, you gotta work a job that you love, and the more and more that I worked for the government, those 5th, 6th, 7th years, I just was still gravitated towards the racing, in which I was successful doing, and so the more time I put into it, the more I gravitated towards just taking the plunge and becoming a professional handicapper. And there was a couple lean years there, but I believe in any venture, be it sports, professional sports, or anything that you want to be good at, you got to take your lumps at the beginning. It's got kind of like a rite of passage, and so basically, towards the end of my postal career, I was handicapping rolling exotics, literally putting in the rolling exotics after my tape work and replay work was done. Put in the rolling exotics, and then going to work, and just doing that for like the last 2 or 3 years.
Tough to do both, that's for sure. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
let me ask you this:
yeah.
when you play as much as you do, it's interesting to me that contests are still on your radar for somebody who plays all the time. What's the appeal of an event like the National Handicapping Championship?
Yeah, it's great. It's crazy because I was literally at the simulcast facility right in Greyhound Park where I was going each and every day. I mean, I literally went. It's a lot easier now, obviously, to play at home than the computer and stuff. But back in the early 2000s, you really had to be more at the venue, and I never saw like a lot of advertisements for tournaments and stuff. And to be honest, to this day, I think I might have happened upon some of the advertisements on DRF, and so then I started playing a couple of tournaments for fun, just to get that competitive nature back. Like I do this every day, and sometimes it can become mundane, and you're watching replays and you're chatting and you're going over your stats and stuff and whatever tools people use, and then when you get to the tournament atmosphere. So I decided to play a tournament at Suffolk Downs, and it was like really great. Like it was like my 3rd tournament, but my first live tournament, and I ended up qualifying for the NHC that second year. Like it was my first tournament that year, but my second year trying to qualify. It was like my 3rd lifetime tournament, and so at Suffolk Downs I qualified for the NHC. And after those first couple of tournaments, I realized real quick, this is a different game, and like you gotta change up your strategy because you're in deep waters if you think you can just walk into a contest tournament, even as a good horse player, and start to rule the roost. You know, I ended up meeting a couple of great people at the Suffolk Downs tournament who I correspond with this day, and you know, great friendships as you guys talked about in the past have really matriculated.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing, the social aspect of it, and it's definitely one of the things that's appealing. The other thing I think as a pro player that's really cool is where else do you get a chance to make that kind of a score over a weekend? Does that carrot dangle out in front of you, James, too, the thought of being able to get paid to that degree at an event like the NHC?
Oh yeah, it's tremendous. You know, it's a tremendous motivation to play for a couple of days and to make a tremendous score. In terms of me, you know, as you know, a professional and having to do this to pay the bills, there's like a happy medium that you have to get into, because you know, I love playing contests and I could play them all day and stuff, but I also have to make sure that I have my everyday game tight and sharp, because I still have to pay the bills. And but I mean, going to those tournaments and you know taking down 40,000-50,000 on a very good afternoon is how can it not be appealing to anybody? There's some really good players there and stuff, and you really have to bring your A game. But I just tell all the people out there, the prospective people, you know, haven't dipped their toe in the water or whatever, you're not just going to roll in there. So get started and start low with these small feeder tournaments and stuff, and you know, practice makes perfect, as the saying goes.
That's great. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Really appreciated having you. When you qualify this year, make sure to holler at me. We'll have you back on, or I'll do something for the paper about you.
Yeah, no problem.
That's all the time we have for today's show. I think we went a little bit long, but that's okay. Folks will give us that, I hope. I want to thank everybody who participated in the show, especially our bad beat contestants, Nick McMurty and James Timinck, Marcus Hersh, of course, always a pleasure to have on the show, Mike Hogan, the stalwart, Charlie Zeggers, the producer, and of course, thanks so much to all of you for listening. Have a great weekend, and may you win all your photos. Yes.